Welcome to Aotearoa Tomorrow. I'm Arthur Falls. Today we have Michael Goldthorpe, a managing partner of the PR firm Hunch. Hunch was involved in developing the Labour Party's PR strategy for their recent unsuccessful re-election campaign. Hearing about how Michael views the campaign is really valuable. It's rare to get a deep analysis of any competition from a losing side, and doubly rare to get one from a public relations specialist as candid as Michael. So this is a rare treat. I'll quickly mention that Michael is a very strong Labour supporter, so that colours his perspective of events. He also uses the word we to refer to both Hunch and Labour's activities. He's on their team politically, so it makes sense in a casual conversation about the election, which this is. But it can get a little bit confusing because he also runs Hunch, which provides professional services to Labour. That's a disclaimer I just wanted to open this episode with, but the interview speaks for itself. With us today, we have Michael Goldthorpe of Hunch. And Michael, you're a public relations specialist and you've recently worked with Labour.
That's right. Recently and for quite a while, worked with Labour because I believe what they believe about everybody working together to make the country better.
It was a tricky election, though, wasn't it?
Well, it was. There are a couple of things at play. One thing about elections in general is that they're a referendum on the mood of the nation. And the mood of the nation echoes the mood of the world, that everybody's a bit scratchy now and things aren't as easy as they were. So the government, the current government, the Labour government, was punished a bit for that, and would always be so. But also, it was the first time for people to represent their views on how we handled the second part of COVID. The 2020 election was right back in the middle of COVID when we were responding incredibly well and everybody was a little bit afraid. So they backed the horse that was leading the charge at the time, and the Labour government did very well out of it. This time around, some of the decisions made by the government during the sort of post-COVID and coming out of COVID era, including obviously vaccine mandates, weren't well received, and the government was also punished for those. But the biggest thing for me and my disappointment in Labour at the last election is that they didn't firmly put hope on the agenda to give people something to believe in and something to vote for, because I believe that most people vote for something better, and Labour wasn't able to paint that picture.
So, Michael, you say that, and we've discussed how essentially you go about winning an election. And one of these key points that you make is that it's important to focus on hope and change, and that those are really the two key messages.
The three things that people want to hear are empathy. This government or this person I'm voting for or this group of people, they recognize who I am and they think like I think. So empathy is a really important part of it. The next one is evidence, as I can see that they're delivering on the things that they're saying. And that's a really important part of getting elected. It underpins trust. And then the third one is hope. I see a picture of the future that feels better and I want to be part of it. Empathy, evidence, and hope. And if you can tick all three of those boxes really clearly, it helps you get elected. For Labour, unfortunately, there was some empathy there in feeling how people feel, in recognising the hardships of cost of living crisis. There wasn't a lot of clear evidence of things they had done to deliver, other than pushing cash out the window. And like I say, I don't think they clearly painted a picture of hope that people could get behind and vote towards. Whereas the opposition did better with those things. Having said that, in the last election in New Zealand, neither of the two biggest parties really clearly outlined that hope layer. And it was interesting that the turnout for those big parties was the lowest it's been in a while, if not forever. and the smaller parties who could have more courage of their convictions in painting a picture of the future got more votes.
Well, they can have more courage in their convictions in painting a picture of the future because they can always negotiate themselves out of any position that they've represented to the public when they make a coalition.
Yeah, 100%. But to an extent, so can the bigger parties, and regardless, hope doesn't need to be specific or counted or measured. Statements like "we will build 100,000 houses" are not ideal in an election campaign, because then people wander the streets trying to count the houses thereafter. But broad strokes, things will get better, and here's some evidence as to how we'll get it there. Is really important. The smaller parties are more specific about it, and their way of getting there is never going to work, and they know that it's going to, like you say, be negotiated out. But it doesn't mean the bigger parties should give up on painting a picture.
So with all that, it feels a bit strange to hear you say this, because it makes me feel like the very notion of a political campaign is predicated on the fact that these people, politicians, are not going to have to deliver on what they claim they are going to deliver on during the campaign. And certainly that was my feeling when I saw a lot of what was said by ACT, for example. But also, one thing I noticed was a lot of the campaign promises were nearly identical between National and Labour.
Yep. Everything's balanced, right? If you see politics as the intersection of a Venn diagram, so you've got a circle on the left and it says purpose, and these are things that our party believes in. And then you've got a circle on the right, which is power, which is our ability to deliver on these things. Then politics is the muddy bit where it crosses over, and we horse trade the details to work out what can be done. But where I go kind of empathy and hope is at a very fundamental level, people need to know what the party believes in. And to your precise point, this last election became a very transactional election, kind of a lolly scramble of policy from different people that none of it really laddered up to values in any useful way. The National Party's tax cuts, which they clearly didn't do the math for, but it didn't seem to matter, and it'll matter more when they try and put them in place. But the tax cuts loosely ladder up to personal responsibility, and we'll give you back more of your money because you make better decisions with it. But that wasn't necessarily congruent with some of the other places where they were jumping into the kind of the social well-being policies of a centre-left government to try and gobble up that centre vote. Labour did sort of the same thing backwards, but they got very, very granular in policy and specifics that nobody could do the math on. Like, it didn't make sense. There was math everywhere that didn't add up, and both sides said the math at the other side didn't add up. And voters would be looking at that going, I don't believe any of you. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not 100% confident this thing will happen. And most people, apparently research suggests that most people sort of to the 50-60% vote essentially altruistically anyway. They vote for something. They vote for themselves to an extent, but also for their children or for their country or for the planet. So these retail kind of like vote for us and get a tax cuts don't make a big difference. They just get muddy and confusing.
I always feel like the most important thing is really when I look at election communication or political communication, is to make it actually comprehensible to people. And something that the core focus of this podcast and YouTube channel is to compare the difference between...
Are we on YouTube as well?
Oh, yeah, definitely, yeah. So the core idea behind this podcast and YouTube channel is to demonstrate the difference between policy and reality, and kind of where the bullshit lies in between. And what I find is, carry on.
The process of policy making and law making in government is the majority of what politicians do, but it's messy and it's compromised and it's awkward and it's negotiated, and people A, don't really care, and B, they don't really want to understand it, and even if they did, it's really hard for them to understand. So, but one of the things that's been happening over the last little while is in the past, mainstream news channels would take that stuff, that messiness, and make it comprehensible for the general masses and spit it out. But what's been happening around the world over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, last 10 in particular, is that individuals take bits of what they hear and amplify them through their own echo chambers, which is why we see politics sliding out to the sides, because you can make a bit of policy sound really clear and simple and outrageously right or outrageously wrong. But when you actually try to bring it all together and make a law, it's very hard to communicate that. So the communication of things is largely done by values and kind of reactively against the fringes on either side. What making up stories? They're not making up stories. They're grabbing something that feels real and telling one side of the story. And obviously, from a pure Greek point of view, the idea of politics is to get all the ideas in a room, knock them around together, and pull out the best compromise or the best answer. But it's always a compromise.
To summarize, you're saying that people don't really understand policy, and I can understand why. It tends to be extremely complex. I think I mean, Three Waters, for example, is one example where it was really poorly communicated, and B, I don't really think a lot of politicians who are advocating for Three Waters really understood the reasons behind Three Waters itself, because it was incredibly complex policy.
To the point of communication, like the challenge of Three Waters, and indeed the tragedy of Three Waters, is that we lost the conversation because the basic principle of that is we've got a whole bunch of different councils around New Zealand all doing what they can to make sure that we've got clean drinking water and good wastewater, and the other water, I can't even remember what it is. But those are the Three Waters. But individual councils find it hard to invest in the infrastructure they need for generations of the future because they just can't find the funding, or the funding's too expensive, or they can't sell it to their people or in their council or whatever it is. So we've got crumbling infrastructure. Stormwater was the other one. It's particularly relevant right now. But we've got the stuff. So basically they were like, let's stop doing this in lots of bits and pieces, and let's bring it all together and do it as one, and make sure we hit the right people with the right money to have the right infrastructure for great drinking water, great stormwater, and great wastewater. In the middle of a great idea, nobody really has a problem with it. Some people like more local representation. Some people don't. Doesn't really matter. Detail. Nobody's got a problem with that. Better water. Save money. Better water. On the other side of that, we have a treaty that's a precious part of who we are as a country, that says that when we make big decisions about big things, we should consult, and we should play together, and we should make sure that everybody's on the same page. And somehow we lost the conversation, and it became a group of people wants to take over our water, and there was nothing we could do to claw that back. And it was fascinating. It wasn't a policy problem. It was a communication challenge in various different ways that broke the idea of getting our water sorted. And
I feel like this cascaded into this defined the zeitgeist of co-governance, brought co-governance into the zeitgeist, and then cascaded into this reaction against what were actually some pretty sensible policy ideas about
100%.
co-governance of natural resources with Māori.
Now, I'm far from an expert in this area, but I am a wordscape, and I think the most interesting thing about that whole debacle was co-governance talks to working together. Just in the word, like it's got co in it, and governance is looking after stuff. So looking after stuff together is co-governance, and somehow that idea of looking after stuff together became like the flagship trigger word for separatism. And I don't even know how it happened, because it couldn't have been further away from what it was all about. It's interesting.
And I mean, it's really interesting speaking to a PR who has witnessed this and has a strong command of the communication side and the nature of the public conversation and public opinion, and to see the way this spun out of control. Anyway, I'm commenting on the fact.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges of democracy in general and how people get elected is the disconnect between the top down, the kind of power down of messaging a message and what we should be talking about, and then the people up of the things people care about, and where the bottom up of the people up of what we care about connects with the power down of what we're talking about, great things happen. So the last election in 2020, there was only one conversation: we need to keep ourselves safe during this situation. And the people up and the power down were having the same conversation, and half the country voted to keep the current government and keep it moving. But by this time around, it's all got a bit fractious, and the power down is having various different conversations about various different things, including the confusion of co-governance and all of these things. And the people up, I feel, are just kind of going, what's going on? It's like, I don't know who to believe. I can clearly see I'm an intelligent person. I can clearly see that the blue ones and the red ones are sort of having the same conversation at me, but I don't know why. And it's when that disconnect arrives in those things that it just doesn't work. For me, to win an election, all you need to do is work out what people are talking about and what they're interested in, and then make sure that you're selling a dream that's congruent with that. You 100% cannot persuade anybody to change their minds. Like if there's a lot of time and money spent in elections trying to persuade people to vote for me or vote for you or whatever, people make people make decisions emotionally, and then post-rationalize them through the things they hear. So you can't persuade people to change their minds. All you can do is persuade them that you think the way they think. And that's why empathy. I think the way you think, empathy. Here's some proof that I think the way you think, evidence. Here's a nice picture of where we will go together, hope. And those are the things that move the dial, I believe, in election results.
This is a great opportunity to veer off course and ask you about something specific, because I feel it fits in well. You've mentioned that people tend to vote altruistically.
There is research to back that up, and there is also research against it. So part of it is part of that is research led, and part of that is just I would like to think so.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
But I mean, with that being the case, and the fact that you need to communicate, you need to figure out what people are talking about and then communicate to what they are actually talking about. What's the deal with the housing crisis? Because I don't see anyone doing anything about it. Labor did communicate about it with the idea of building 100,000 homes, which they didn't do. But this is the thing that I hear everyone talking about in my circles. And I don't understand why this hasn't been something.
I think the housing crisis is complex because of people's sort of success biases. I don't quote me these numbers. He says on the videos, but I think roughly six out of 10 Kiwis own their own home in different ways. Maybe some of that. Do you know? There's reasonably high property ownership. Sounds about right. And in New Zealand, buying a piece of dirt and putting some sticks and bricks on it is part of our psyche and what we do. And it's hard to do it. And it's always been hard to do it. And every generation has found it hard to buy a house. There's math and numbers to suggest that today's kids are finding it harder than ever before to find a house. And you can play out those things, but it's always been hard. But the problem of home ownership is essentially the problem of property values. And if I own a home, I want it to retain its value. So whilst I can altruistically help out anything, anywhere around people wanting to get into property, I can't risk any conversation that lowers the value of my house. So there is an innate version of selfishness in there. But also there's a success bias. It's like, I think I own a home because I worked really hard and saved really hard, and that's how I bought one. And so if you can't, you're obviously not working hard enough or saving hard enough. And most people find it hard to imagine that there is actually more in the way of inequality challenge there, and different challenges across different groups of people as well. It's housing's really complicated. We have love affairs with our property in New Zealand that nobody else does. I think it was part of there was a whole lot of things in this last election, but one of the things that disappointed me the most is that with a majority in the House, neither of our Labour prime ministers were brave enough and bold enough to fix property tax, because I don't think we should tax everybody that owns a house. I think capital gains on family houses is a bad idea. I think you work hard and you move up. But if I've got 2 houses, tax me on the second one. And if I got 3, 4, 5, 6 houses, tax me on all of those, because I'm taking more out of the pot than I'm really entitled to. So we should tax me on that. And the thing about that policy, whether it's capital gains, I think wealth tax gets into the tax of envy. But anyway, a capital gains tax like that on property, 60% of the country was behind it, and still the Labour government didn't back it. They could have gone to the polls and offered first home buyers a way in by taxing it. So they didn't do that. They ignored tax. They decided, well, they didn't ignore tax. They tried to take GST off bananas. That's my take on that. I think some of the simple things are actually some of the hard things. And personally, I'd rather be famously unpopular and do something meaningful than wade through the vanilla ice cream of policy that sounds okay in focus groups.
Which seems to be the way that policy is put forward with our current political system or electoral system. People say that it was different under FPP.
I don't know. I don't know that it was. I think across the board, people do vote for altruistically, but they're not going to vote for things that feel like they hurt them. So it's like nobody's going to go to the polls and say we're increasing taxes by X and X and X. Across the board, specific taxes like I say, capital gains tax. I'm not a fan of the Greens wealth tax because I think it's an aspiration tax, but I do recognise the need to mitigate intergenerational inequality where my kids do all right because I did all right, and I handed it down. Somebody should get in the middle of that and share it out, I believe. But yeah, unpopular policies don't win elections. There's no bones there. But I think you need to be clear about the things you might do, and then when you get in, that's when you do the hard stuff. And if that means they knock you out, well, at least you did something useful. And
it seems like that's almost the idea behind the gambit of getting elected, right? You get there so that you can actually do something that otherwise would be unpopular. The fear is whether or not this turns out to be something, say, that has particularly negative consequences or positive ones.
Yeah, well, everything has good bits and bad bits, right? It's if it was all unicorns and rainbows, then we wouldn't really need a government. We'd just tap what we wanted into the computer, and Chat GTP would run the country. But I'm a big fan of the Overton window. Basic idea. There's a bunch of stuff that people are sort of okay with. And as long as you're playing inside, and you can sort of read that in society, as long as you're playing inside the stuff that people are sort of okay with, people are not going to be all that upset with you. So as political parties, I think it's our job to nudge the Overton window to where we want it to be, such that we can make the moves at the time. The problem with politics, for me right now, apart from the fact that it's still quite boring to a lot of people and not enough people talk about it, but one of the problems is that we don't discuss ideas in a useful way. We get on high horses and rant in the social media and explode idea fragments away from each other rather than bringing them together and make stuff happen.
On the subject of the Overton window, I feel like somewhere in that mix of three waters and co-governance, the policies of Labour in those two areas moved outside of the Overton window for people across the political spectrum. And I wonder what your perception is of how that happened. That's one part. The second part of the question is, to what extent is the Overton window about communication, and to what extent is it about policy itself?
I think for like the old adage, right? Explaining is losing. Is it couldn't be more true of politics. So for me, the communication comes first to set the train tracks so that the steam train of policy can go off and do its thing. I think we just mishandled the ball on co-governance. But it was, remember as well, it was a problem of the context and of the time, because the trust in the government was in 2020 at an all-time high. It's like, this government is looking after us. We back them. Let's do that. And then gradually over time, it chipped away. And by late 2021, there were a whole bunch of people that were unhappy about the level at which the government was in my life. When we first started working with Labour, our biggest problem was that nobody even really knew what government did or what was going on, and they were all going to vote because nobody cared, because government gets on with running the country and I get on with my life. But then through COVID, we saw firsthand how immediately impactful the government can be in my everyday life. One day they say, go home. The next day I'm at home for 4 weeks. And suddenly the government is quite literally in my living room and in my conversation and making rules about who I can talk to. And that's a massive, massive change from the freedoms that we enjoyed before that time. It was necessary. It was well run. It was incredibly well communicated. I don't have a problem with any of that. What it was, though, was the government in my business every day of my life. But off the back of all of that, suddenly we're having a conversation about what seemed to be, what appeared to be, a conversation about who owns the water. It was never a conversation about who owns the water, but it appeared for some reason to get it. And then co-governance was never explained, but explaining is losing. I don't know that it could have been explained. The references to explain it were, we've been doing this for years. Look at what we've been doing. It works really well. Nobody cared. All we kind of heard was, yesterday you sent me home. The next day you wouldn't let me out till I had a jab. And if I didn't get a jab, then you fired me. And today you're doing something kooky with the water. And what does this mean? And I just think it was the end of the rope for a lot of people on government intervention in my everyday life.
What I'm getting is that it was not so much the policy themselves. It was this commonality that was government intervention into daily life, or a sense of expanding government sovereignty.
It's tricky, right? It would be really interesting to take a time machine and replay COVID with a national government, right? Because I don't think I don't think playbook-wise they would have done it all that differently, because we know that because you look around the world and everybody did pretty much the same thing. Trump had ideas about injecting yourself with bleach, but other than that, most people played the same sort of game, and we played it really well. But the thing about ideologically about a centre-left government is they are the people of big government and government control. And alongside this noise about co-governance and three waters, they took all the little university, all the little polytechnics, and wrapped it all up into one polytechnic and gave it a nice name. And they took all of these DHBs and they wrapped it up into one and said, we'll control that too. And from a perception point of view, it was a 3-year land grab of stuff we care about or don't care about that all went to the government, and alongside that, there's celebration of Te Reo Māori and bringing the reo into language and into names, and we don't say transport, we say waka kotahi, and most reasonable normal people celebrate that, and it's awesome, and it tells a story. Who doesn't want a canoe in that way? But all of these things were happening at the same time, and I reckon Three Waters I think it was badly led. I think it was badly communicated. I don't even know if it needed to be a conversation because it's just so obvious that we should fix the water. But with all of those things going on, that was the zit that popped, and it caused an awful lot of damage that shouldn't have been caused, because co-governance wasn't what it was about, and wasn't almost wasn't relevant to the conversation. But we made it about the wrong thing, or it was made about the wrong thing, and then we lost the story. And explaining is losing, and that's how it. They renamed it. Like Three Waters is a charming name, right? Three Waters that tells the story. It always helps you remember the third. And they renamed it to the Clean Water Bill or some such to try and distance themselves from the confusion that they caused. But by that time, it's all over. It's like you got to make your train tracks with your communication within the Overton window, and then you can take your steam trainer policy through it. That's what I reckon. So much that needs to be done that could just get done if we don't dance in the language of it.
I think back to the way that ACT ran their campaign, and they had that phrase, that slogan, end division by race. And I feel like that was a really effective categorization, miscategorization, but obviously it's their way of communicating to present themselves favorably and their opposition negatively. End division by race. And there was absolutely none of that anywhere.
Yeah, no, and as a country, so I'm an expat, British, but I feel Kiwi, and one of the things I'm proudest about in New Zealand is the fact that we understand that this land we're on is shared and respected in all the right ways, and so many places, like in the late 18th century, essentially the English and the Spanish and French just went over and took shit over, and we're dealing with that now, and I think New Zealand deals with it really well, but I'm disappointed because I think David Seymour's one of the smartest guys in the room, and I don't agree with all of his things ideologically, but I like his passion for good ideas, and I love his clear ability to communicate. But pushing a racism button knowingly in that way is Trumpian at best. But all of these things made the entire election about race, which brilliantly, like one of the things that this did is it means we now have 7 or 8 MPs from Te Pāti Māori in government. But it's because we're fighting each other, not because we're working together.
It's interesting you make that point, because I was totally oblivious to that.
We started on the race game We started on the race game because when people raised opposition to going back to Three Waters, when people raised opposition to Three Waters, we responded with, "Are you racist?" In various different ways, which it's all as I'm going to say is we use race as a weapon rather than tolerance and unity to solve problems. And it's not just the centre right that does it. The hard left does it, the middle left does it, and the Labour Party does it. Everybody uses race as a weapon in different ways to make their points, and I think it's boring, and I think it's dumb, and I think it's unhelpful.
It's a pity because I didn't really recognize that this is what was going on at the time. It seemed, I only noticed it in ACT and New Zealand First, and almost humorously parochial, and how clumsy and blunt and offensive it was in New Zealand First. I just thought it was self-humiliation.
Yes, but it's got a following. It's like Winston's genius, right? He did the numbers, and he's like, these are the two things that will get me the 6% I need to be able to have a little swan song and make everybody wait to have a decision. So we can't send the Prime Minister to the big meeting because I'm going to wait until I sit in a room and ignore the text and blah blah blah. He's a pantomime politician, but he's part of democracy. But he did it by scooping a couple of policies that he knew he would get enough numbers to be able to have those conversations. The bigger parties can't do that because they're inflammatory policies, and it doesn't work both ways. But yeah.
It's a very tangled web when you step out
Isn't it?
On the face reading into the network of communication and ideas and meaning and different demographics, and how these messages are targeted and how messages are turned back on themselves by opposing politicians. It's fascinating, and in communications teams. And I also think it's interesting you make the comment that it's important to begin communication within the Overton window so that the policy can get on the track and go where it needs to go.
Explaining is losing, but the other thing that's really challenging about elections is that the politicians are having these conversations every day. It's their job. But the voting public only has this conversation once every 3 years. So if you imagine that if we had we hear detail, but we pick up on themes, which is why most people vote for the same party they've always voted for. Some people bounce around, but when they bounce around, they kind of bounce with the worm more than anything else. It's like right track, wrong track on the worm. But politicians in particular, they think the detail of their messaging is going to make a huge difference. And it does in a way, and I'll come back to it. But actually it's the feel of what's going on that's where people move their votes. The detail of the messaging only makes a real difference when somebody jumps in and blows it up. So if I say there's going to be a tax cut of X and you say, where's the math? Then the conversation is about blowing up the detail of the messaging, but it's the feel that everybody walked into this election going, I'm a bit tired. We're running out of cash. I haven't seen Labour do a lot. I'm either pleased or not pleased that Jacinda's gone, and I either like or don't like the new guy, although the new guy's not as intense as Jacinda. Like Jacinda, people loved Jacinda or hated Jacinda, and Chippy's a bit meh. Nobody liked or trusted Christopher Luxon. Nobody did, including probably Christopher Luxon. And then all the others chipping away at the edges, but it's the feels, right? It's the feels that make the difference. And we landed in a really interesting place because actually there wasn't that much in it. For a country that felt so divided, there wasn't that much in it, really. It's, we had to have have Winston up the middle to make the balance of power to be. We haven't got it done yet. 6 years telling Labor that they haven't got anything done, and the first thing, now I'm being political, and the first thing Chris has to do is get a government together, and he hasn't done it.
So what's next? What's next for New Zealand politics? Coming from the point of view of a communicator, that's particularly interesting to me, because we can hear it from the politicians.
Yep. I'm fascinated by the middle. We've got a Green Party that's always had a good following and a strong following. But it's a party that's constitutionally quite a hard left kind of social justice party, and that doesn't sit well with a lot of people, and it also doesn't sit well with working with either side. So there's an opportunity potentially to bring some environmental policy into the middle, so that there is a voice for the planet that people can vote for that will pretty much always be in government. In New Zealand, we're kind of roughly split 50-50 and wash around. The middle is the opportunity, and that middle has been hijacked time and time again by one joker and his passion for being the person in the middle. Surely to goodness we can communicate a party into the middle there, right? Call it the balance party. I don't know. Call it the we will work with anybody. Call it the handbrake party, which Peters has done a few times. It doesn't really matter, but there are people on the right who will never trust the left, and there are people on the left who will never trust the right. And every 3 years, we get in a room and argue about it, and it lands somewhere. And every 3 years, the power that makes the decision of who runs the country plays out the middle. Imagine if Luxon could have picked up the phone to James Shaw on the day after the election. He said, "You and me, buddy, what do you want for the planet? Let's get it done." We would have a government right now, and we would have a whole bunch of people on the centre left feeling good about the fact that their vote for the planet did something. So we would have more happy New Zealanders getting more stuff done, but we can't do it because politics seems to come before pragmatism. And power is the ultimate win. It comes down to a couple of seats most times, and those couple of seats usually sit in the middle.
So you're saying we need a new political party, is what you're saying?
Personally, I don't think we need a new one, and I'm aware of how hard it is to build one. But a fascinating conversation with a lot of people that I've had is, I do the political compass and I land on top, but I don't even know who they are, so I'm not going to vote for them. And it surprises me that we can't wrap infrastructure and people and money and donors and world around. Let's have a bunch of people in the middle who are looking 20 years ahead, who are looking 30 years ahead. And our job is to help work out what the future looks like. But because we hold the balance of power in the middle, we will always be there and we will always have influence. Remember, politics is just the intersection of power and purpose. And so if you can get a party with purpose up the middle, they will always hold enough power to make stuff happen. For my money, the answer to that is either rebrand New Zealand First without Winston Peters, but I think the ship has sailed and I think too much damage has been done, or find a way to make top a credible voting choice for people in 2023.
Wow, I mean, that is a great spot to end on. I know you've got a hard stop. Thanks so much, Michael. I really appreciate it.
No worries.
It's awesome to have an actual communicator talk about what took place during the election and also elucidate or shine a light on that gap between policy and people that is really the realm of the professional communicator.
Well, and we give people too much credit for how much they care and how much they understand. The adage, keep it simple, stupid, is it could never be more true than it is in politics. Winston Peters did a very good job with that.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you all for joining me on this short series. This was the last interview in the set. I will be back in February with a wrap-up of learnings and an analysis of some of the statements made by the interviewees we've heard from. That will be the end of Series 1, but it makes for a good pilot, and Series 2 will feature greater production values and more interviews. Like, share, subscribe, and most importantly, have a great Christmas. I'll see you in February.